Hey everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We're 2 out of the 3 clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. And I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And we are without John today, who may be getting a dog. Is that right? John and Emma going to get their first child, a 4-legged dog. And also Rob. We're without Rob today, who's taking care of his wife, Melissa. And so we got Jan representing Syracuse University behind the camera with the headphones on. So today, what a passage. Mm-hmm. We have the worst birthday party of all time. A scandalous mess made by a man who just couldn't get out of his own way.
I know, I had to do some forest bathing before.
I'm super dined. I mean, we have an adulterous man who is greedy for power at all costs, from one of the most dysfunctional families of all time, who throws a party for himself and creates a feast day out of it. He has his stepdaughter do an erotic dance in front of drunken men. He's so delighted, he overpromises a kingdom. He doesn't have a kingdom. He's not a king. He can't give it away. He is in an immoral marriage to a half-brother's scheming wife, seeking evil revenge on the one person who tells the truth. This just gets better. And then the husband has a complicated relationship with the truth teller, misunderstands honor for the sake of reputation, orders a murder, then grieves and gets the head of the man on a platter at the birthday party.
I'm exhausted.
Let's go to the text. Mark 6:14-29. King Herod heard of Jesus and his disciples, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying, John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him. But others said, it is Elijah. And others said, it is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
It's a crazy story, to say the least. But maybe it helps to put it in the context of Mark,
of course.
Just because to take it right out of the gospel and not frame it, maybe we miss something. So last week and the chapter before we hear, or in the beginning of chapter 6, we hear Jesus sending his disciples out 2 by 2 to all the villages far and wide to proclaim and to heal. And, they perform great exploits. And this is what Herod heard about Jesus and his disciples. And then coming after this gruesome story is the disciples coming back to tell Jesus all that they'd done. And Jesus, says, come and rest a while. It's kind of another Markan sandwich where we get the disciples' mission. This is embedded in that. So maybe there's some lens on this that this is what it looks like if you're going to be a disciple of Jesus. You're going to tangle with the powers that be and you're not guaranteed a happy ending.
Yeah, I'm all with you on all of that. We do get the Markan sandwich, which is hard to see if you just get a pericope out of nowhere. Yeah. But not only the Markan sandwich, but you're right on about the theme here, which is basically John preaches and is delivered up, foreshadowing that Jesus preaches and is delivered up, foreshadowing that disciples will preach and be delivered up, and foreshadowing Mark's community who will stand with Jesus and be delivered up. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Mark's themes are discipleship and the roughness thereof.
Right.
Really, straight up.
Yeah, and it's, of course, as we've said before, written for a community that probably, or possibly of all the gospel communities that they're written for, that each gospel is written for, Mark maybe be living the most intensely against persecution and warring factions. So, it's the earliest gospel, and things are really not settled, and there's lots of tumult. Romans against Jews, and Jews against Jews, and Jews against Christians, and Christians against Jews and Romans. So it's pretty intense, and I think it's reflected in Mark embedding this story here.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's the only story in Mark's gospel that is not about Jesus. Not about Jesus directly. Yeah, it's and in Mark's narrative, which it goes bang, bang, immediately, 43 times. I know we get two immediatelys in here, but this one actually, in a weird way, slows it down.
It does.
For the most macabre of stories. I mean, it really stands out in some sense in the gospel.
And in another sense, it's exactly about Jesus, because it's sort of the foreshadow, or very much the foreshadowing of Jesus' own passion and death. So in some ways, it's the precursor that prepares us for what's ahead.
And for sure, one of the things that you're always often bringing before us, is that to stand up for the gospel is to get crushed by, or to clink into power, religious powers, to clink into political powers, and to expect nothing less, because that's in some sense that's the kind of mega thing that's happening here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. There's
one thing I'd love to talk about. Do you mind if I just do this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this might be apropos of nothing, but can I just talk about it nonetheless?
Please do.
Okay, who is this guy? Mm-hmm. I just want to start there, because
Herod or John the Baptist?
Herod. We're pretty good on John the Baptist. I mean, remember a few months ago we wrote John the Baptist, we wondered where Jesus was. But let's talk about this guy, because he can be super confusing, because he's referred to as King Herod, but he's not King Herod. And colloquially in the time he was known as King Herod, but he was not a king. And just for those of you in Podland, just to make sure we all know that King Herod, or so-called Herod the Great, was the worst of all people, worse than his son, who this guy is, who slaughtered. He's in the Gospel of the slaughter, the innocents. He was great because of the Temple Mount that he built, and he died at 4 BC. Mm-hmm. He did have 10 wives, one of whom was Cleopatra, which I think is kind of cool.
Oh, wow.
And then when he died, his kingdom was divided into 4. And that's where we get this guy, Herod Antipas, who is in Luke's Gospel, the Tetrarch, means 4. He rules one of these 4 things. And this guy ain't much better than his papa. And he ruled from 4 BC to 39 AD. And he so wanted to be a king that he reached out to the emperor to become king and got turned down. And then later he has this puppet kingship in Galilee. While he's running the puppet kingship, lo and behold, he ends up not only executing John the Baptist, but he's involved in the execution of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Remember that? And it says,
that.
Yeah, Pilate trying to get out of that. You're paid to remember that. I have to say that when I was first looking at this, I kind of forgot it, but don't tell everybody who's listening to the pod, that he was from Galilee and he got sent to Herod. Mm-hmm. And then just to finish this, and sorry for the long-windedness of this, because I plunged into the most useless details about this guy's life, reading Josephus, and this whole thing shows up in Josephus. But at the end of his life, and wait to hear this, there's a change in emperors. And so this guy, Herod, still married to Herodias, makes another power move to get to be named king. He's so greedy for power. Mm-hmm. And so he reaches out to Caligula, the new king, who's so chafed that he takes his territory away from him and banishes him to Gaul. I mean, this is a bad life gone bad. Wow. Worse. Anyway, sorry for the long excursus on this guy, but that's who this guy is, and he's in the Bible. He's biblically
he's
bad.
Worthy of some reality TV.
Yeah, definitely.
21st century. Yeah, he's a bad dude, and I think he is incredibly power hungry, and it's important in a way to understand who he is, because he's the one, regardless of how puppet-like his kingship is, he still has the authority to kind of, cut off a head if he wants to.
Yeah.
And I think what I would like to talk about on the heels of all that is just how this really sets us up to understand what goes on at Jesus' passion, because with Herod, he's gathered his powerful around him. He's got this rivalry with his brother Philip over their wife Herodias. Herodias was Philip's wife, who Herod has, and that's why John the Baptist is in jail for calling out Herod for marrying his brother's wife. Yeah. So they're all upset about that, including Herodias, who would rather see John the Baptist dead than ever see his face again. And Herod sort of wants to keep him alive in prison because he's afraid of him and thinks he's a holy man, at least.
Super complicated relationship.
Yeah.
Says he liked him. Liked to listen to him.
Herod's afraid of him. Herodias, the wife, is angry with him and wants him dead. And so, Herod throws this party, and he's gathered around all the political, military, economic leaders around him. There's something archetypal about that he's got all the power on his side and in his home, and he can do what he wants with all that access and power. And he is a king for the purpose of this story. He's called a king several times. The king says to his daughter, I think also we could take an aside and say that this daughter is called Herodias in Mark's gospel, but Josephus, the historian, calls her Salome, which is where we get all these operas and great plays about
Strauss's
Salome,
opera.
Strauss's opera. And that's how people even know the story, really, is from Richard Strauss. But in any case, she's not a sexy, sultry seductress. She's a young girl.
She's a kid.
The word in the gospel is the word for young girl, the same word we heard for Jairus' daughter, the 12-year-old. So this is a girl totally at the mercy of her parents, being manipulated into this scandalous situation. Her dad, the king, tells her to dance for his party. And, echoing another Old Testament story of Esther. If anyone remembers the story of Esther, maybe you were going to bring that up, but Esther is the one who was kind of sold or selected in a contest to go meet the king of an occupying kingship over Israel in the Old Testament. And she used her power and access to the king. The king called her out because she was so beautiful, and she had this opportunity to be granted one wish. And it was the same kind of setting, this drunken king making an overpromise. And instead, and Esther uses her power to liberate and save her people. So here, the wording is exactly the same in Mark, that the king says, ask me for whatever you wish. I will give to you, even half my kingdom. It's exactly what the king had said to Esther. Yeah. So I think Mark is setting us up here, too, to see an opposing way of using power and opportunity. Oh,
that's such a good call. I like the way you finish that, too. We get into the archetypes or biblical types here. I love your calling out on the Esther. Also we get Herodias, the mom, as Jezebel.
Oh yeah, right.
And that whole thing, and in the end, Jezebel also meets a rough ending. She gets defenestrated, chucked out of a window, and fed to dogs. But that's a whole other podcast here. And so we've got this.
Please take your children out of the room.
This is the Bible as family values. The family value Bible system, which is one of the things that always drives me crazy. I always think they're reading a different book than we are. This is actually an icon. An Orthodox icon of the beheading of John the Baptist. Imagine putting this up in your house. And here you see, of course, the daughter dressed as such, as a girl, and John being beheaded. And at the table we have Herodias, really trying to get her husband to do her bidding, and then John's head coming on a platter. But there is, as you're saying, there is biblical precedent for such terrible behavior. And the particularity of it, it's both paradigmatic and real.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that this is an extra biblical and shows up in Josephus's Antiquities. It's interesting because John the Baptist is enormous enormously famous. I mean, it clearly is the one who brought back Hebrew prophecy after a 400-year downtime. But Jesus doesn't show up in the Antiquities of Josephus. But we have this beheading story in there.
So can I just
talk about whatever you want to talk
about the crowd? Because I think what's happening with Herod, and you were giving us a great portrait of this man who has so much, he clutches on so much power. And what the way it foreshadows Jesus' passion in some ways is that he's got all these people around him, and by sending the daughter in to dance, they're like, working this crowd up into a frenzy. And so they all kind of fall in love with her. They're entranced by her. And, by Herod giving her a wish, this little girl has no idea what to wish for. So she runs to her mother, who's got it in her mind to do away with John the Baptist. And so she makes the daughter be the emissary, and they'll eat right out of this daughter's hand and do whatever she wants. And, in other words, the crowd is like fed this thing that they want. They'll be told that they want also, that John the Baptist should be killed.
Oh, interesting.
But because the crowd, and when Jesus is going to be crucified, you don't get the sense that crowd really knows what they're doing either. I mean, they don't have it out for Jesus. They're kind of just being whipped up by the powers and him being pitted against Barabbas and all that stuff.
Yeah,
there's this whole mob violence being conjured up here.
Oh, that's a really good call. I wouldn't have thought of that. I like that. And that's a completely new thought to me. I was on the other side of that, which was that Herod and Pilate have such great similarities.
They do.
We hear this in Matthew's gospel that when Pilate doesn't know what to do with Jesus, and he hears he's from Galilee and thinks he can unload him on Herod because Herod's the king of Galilee, so-called, quote, king of Galilee. And it's his territory at least. And then Herod wants to talk to Jesus in the same way. It says he wanted to talk to Jesus in the same way he clearly wanted to talk to John the Baptist. He liked listening to him, but didn't know what to do with him and sent him back. And then we, in each case, Pilate and Herod, we get a person of authority who you get some sense way deep down they know the right thing to do, but they don't have the courage to stand up to the crowd. Right. So they make an appeasing choice that ends up dishonoring them in a biblical way for eternity, or for as long as the Bible's going. I mean, we, suffered under Pontius Pilate, right? And here we, in another thing could have been, John the Baptist could have been suffered under Herod.
You should have said Herod and Pontius.
So we get incredible parallels. You have to have the crowd parallels of the leaders.
Yeah. And the upshot of that, I think, is these two are exposed as types. And they're not the first or the last of their type at all.
Yeah.
The power of Jesus dying is that he is raised to show, what has happened and to let us see it. So I think by having this example of John the Baptist, we can see it all the more that Jesus' death is not unique, but it's very much like John the Baptist's death.
Yeah.
It's unique in its ability to show us what's going on here with the mechanisms and the human behaviors and the crowd violence and all that stuff.
Yeah, so excuse me for yaying and interrupting you. I'm yaying that. Yes, you're absolutely right. I think there's one categorical difference here, which is in John the Baptist's death. John's referred to 3 times in Mark's gospel, but this is the arc of it. It goes, John's done, and just like when he says in John's gospel, John the Evangelist's gospel, I must decrease and he must increase. So in that Jesus increases as John goes down, the gospel preached and Jesus increased. But the major difference is when John the Baptist dies, his movement pretty much ends besides the folks who live in Palestine.
Right.
In the Palestinian territories, there's still some John the Baptist followers. But when Jesus dies, the resurrection changes the story. So his movement actually grows. Exactly. So there's one major difference. But the paradigm...
Well, I meant the death itself.
Yes, the death itself. Yeah, I was saying the paradigm is the same, for sure. The difference is the resurrection. But you're absolutely right on. I mean, even interestingly, the disciples, even if John dies, the disciples go out to preach repentance. They're still preaching John's message. I mean, the kingdom carries on.
Right. I mean, hence we have this gospel. I mean, it's good news. Like this whole book is good news.
There you have it, folks.
Right.
This decapitation is good news.
I think, to read it, knowing the people reading it for the first time already have the knowledge of the resurrection and more to the point, the experience of the resurrection. the courage and the boldness and the faith and the hope of that, they still need the encouragement that this is the path. And one of our great commentators, it's in a book we both have, and I think it's Lamar. It's a commentary we often read, and he talks about significance versus success. I don't know if you read that for this passage, but he talks about how, Herod has all the trappings of success, all the wealth, all the power, all the political influence, and all that stuff. And John the Baptist has only significance. And same with the followers of Jesus and Jesus himself, that disciples are called into a life of significance and not worldly success.
Yeah, that's super cool. I love that significance versus success thing. And I mean, this is, for instance, tying into that, doing the honorable thing, doing the right thing. I mean, Herod completely misunderstands honor. He mistakes, keeping an oath that he gave as a drunk person, keep the oath so that he murdered somebody. I mean, you want to talk about, a monumental, and you're right. This is if this was going to be a parabolic story, it would be a story about do the right thing, do the right thing, and obviously pointing to the fact that a whole host of people do the wrong thing, Herod and Herodias. They do the wrong thing.
Yeah. I mean, he's falling victim to his own structure. And, one person I read, Robert Hamilton Kelly, who I really love, he talks a lot about sacred violence and the myth of all that, is that King Herod, though he's a king or a self-appointed king, he's the least free and the least powerful in the whole story. Because he could withdraw his oath, or he could make a different decision, but he just caves to the crowd and caves to his wife. And
Pilate says the exact same thing. Pilate says he has no power. Also, that's such a good call on your part. This is the part of the human story underneath these stories that is so good, because this is the stuff of literature, right? I mean, we still are finding ourselves in situations where we have to make tough calls. We might want to appease people because we just don't want them mad at us, and we might kind of shade things one way or the other. If this were going to be a family Bible story, this would be a kind of like, you'd have to put on there, do the right thing. Do the right thing. There are a lot of places you might go with that, but I like that. Yeah. Complete misunderstanding of what the right thing is.
Yeah, I think the significance of a crowd in Mark's gospel is it can't be understated. And even when we had the healing of the hemorrhaging woman, her faith was to enter the crowd, and when she shouldn't have, she was ritually unclean and everything. And then she sort of steps out of the crowd again by confessing everything that she had done to Jesus, and knowing that they could have put her out because she was unclean and everything. So there's this play between crowd and the person who does the right thing or the wrong thing. And I think we're always up against that. And the crowd is kind of stand-in for our culture, or, the mores that we think are the standard. Mistake them for God's standard.
Yeah, once you put the lens on of division and depreciation of people, once you make it so that not everybody is a human being created equal in the image of God, and once you start dividing, it's trouble. It's just trouble.
Yeah.
It's trouble. Yeah. So you have a last word for the good people on the other end of their ears or their sight?
Do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
No, I don't. I feel like we covered a lot of ground here.
So folks, thank you for tuning in for the beheading of John the Baptist. We really appreciate your paying attention to our pods. It's exciting for us, and the conversation is deeply meaningful to all of us too. Like or share or send this thing out, or send us a note, or call the warm line. And again, thanks to you, Jan, on the other end, who's taken over for the duties today as Rob's off doing his thing. And so thank you to you. And in spite of the beheading, peace be with you. Take care.